Hello, can you? Hello, Josephine, can you hear me?
Hi, Felix. Yes, we can hear you all fine. Thank you, everyone who's attended so far, who's come in. We're just going to wait about 1 or 2 more minutes just to let some people come in, and then we'll get going very shortly. Thanks. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for attending. This is the Afrobarometer hashtag Voices Africa webinar on youth, where we've got a selection of speakers from across the continent on youth issues using Afrobarometer data. So we're just going to get going for now, and if people are coming in later, that's fine. They can just catch up. So as I said, the Voices Africa webinar series is a platform for discussion of Afrobarometer's round 8 findings. So previous editions of the webinar have been on Africa's attitudes towards China, views on democracy in Francophone Africa, and attitudes towards international aid and trade. The theme for this month is, of course, International Youth Day, which was on the 12th of August, which was channelizing youth power for nation building. So this would seem to require listening as to what the youth have to say, but are our leaders really listening to when the youth talk? So today I'm very excited to share this panel with you and to discuss some of the findings from the Afrobarometer Round 8 data. We're excited to have an all-youth panel from across the continent who will be discussing the latest Afrobarometer data on the youth's problems, experiences, evaluations, and expectations. So as a brief introduction, my name is Mikhail Musa. I'll be the moderator for today's webinar. I'm the project leader at the South African Reconciliation Barometer at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, which is Afrobarometer's national partner in South Africa. Joining us on the panel and who'll be giving the presentation today, the main presentation, is Guilford Boateng Asiima, who's a research analyst at the Center for Democratic Development in Ghana, in Accra. So from West Africa. And then we also have Chioma Agwebo, who's the executive director at Tech Nigeria. I'm very excited that she's be able to join us today. And to the other side, we've got Karen Wakoli, who's the executive director at Emerging Leaders Foundation in Kenya, joining us from Nairobi. We also have Riatlehile Makateng, who's the president of the National University of Lesotho Students Union in Southern Africa as well. And joining us also from Johannesburg, making up the final member of the panel, is Lennon Monnier, who's the African Peer Review Mechanism, the AU Youth Coordinator as well. So that is the panel. We will be discussing some of the findings that Guilford is going to present to us. But of course, we encourage you to participate as well. So if you want to, please feel free to pose any questions in the Q&A function. The session is being recorded and being streamed live on YouTube as well. So if you weren't able to connect to the Zoom, you can do on YouTube. You can also choose the translation feature to hear the translated audio in either English or French. If you are going to be using social media to talk about this event, please remember to use the hashtag #VoicesAfrica. And as the presentation is ongoing, if there's anything that the panelists bring up that you want to talk about, or you want to post questions about the report, about the data itself, or anything that is raised in this discussion, please use the Q&A feature on Zoom, and then I will be able to read some of them out to the panelists. We're also very grateful to our partner organizations who made this happen. So the Center for Democratic Development, Ghana, the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation in Cape Town, and the Institute of Development Studies in Nairobi as well. So I am going to stop talking for now and hand over to Gilfred, who is going to present to us some findings from the round 8 survey of Afrobarometer, and specifically with the focus on youth. So Gilfred, you've got about 20 minutes, and it would be great if you could sort of talk us through your findings and what are some of the implications for this. And afterwards, we'll have a panel discussion, but anyone in the audience, please feel free to pose any questions in the Q&A session. So Gilfred, I'm going to hand over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. And thank you to the co-panelists who have joined and all the other people who have joined us virtually. I'm excited to share these findings, not just because I'm a youth myself, but because of the central theme for the International Youth Day, which emphasizes on the importance of channeling the youth to nation building. First of all, addressing the needs of the youth for education, for engagement, and for livelihood has become a central tenet of global and continental policy discussions for the past 2 decades, right from the MDGs in 2000s to the African Youth Charter 2006, which also underscores the right of the youth to participate in the political process and decision-making processes. And it even calls upon all the states to ensure that the youth acquire the necessary skills to be able to do so. The United Nations Development Goals, SDGs, also underscore the essential role of the youth in promoting or achieving inclusive and peaceful societies. In fact, over 1/3 of 169 targets established as part of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals focus on the youth, the importance of the youth, their empowerment, their participation, and their well-being. And the importance of the youth is also highlighted in achieving 2 key United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, that is peaceful, just, and inclusive societies, and also partnership and implementation. So let's turn to Afrobarometer latest survey from 33 African countries and see the challenges and the priorities by African youth. First of all, I would like to talk about the outlook of the African youth in terms of how the countries, the direction of African countries in terms of trust in political leadership. When it comes to the direction of their countries, when we ask this question, on average across 33 countries, you have 6 in 10 young Africans, that is 61%, aged between 18 and 35, who say their country is going in the wrong direction. The view that things are moving in the wrong direction, as you can see, is shared almost equally across all age brackets. A similar proportion of young adults, 55%, are also dissatisfied with the way democracy works in their country. And the dissatisfaction with democracy is higher among young adults compared with the older adults. When we asked them to assess the trust they have in the president and the members of parliament, a majority of 56% of young Africans say they do not trust their members of parliament at all or trust them just a little. And half, that is 49%, feel the same about their president. When compared with other age brackets, you could see that young adults are more likely than older citizens to say they do not trust their MPs and president. On the issue about corruption, we have majority of of the young, in fact, 3 in 10 of young Africans believe that either their members of parliament are corrupt or officials who work at the office of the presidency are corrupt. Okay, so we want to discuss the most important problems facing the youth on the continent. The most important problems facing the youth on the continent. We asked the youth the most important problems that they face, and if you look at the issues over there, you can see that African youth most frequently cite unemployment, followed by health, education, infrastructure, roads, water supply, crime, security, and management of the economy as the most important problems that they face that they want their governments to address. On average, across the 33 African countries, young people, that is 34%, are somewhat more likely than their elders to identify a lack of job as one of their country's top 3 problems. Education is a higher priority among youth, that is 29%, and those in the middle age, ranging 36 years to 55 years, when you compare this to the older respondents, which is 21%. I have to say that even though the youth are more likely than their older citizens to cite education as an important problem, they are also more likely to have an education. And a majority of 62% of young Africans have some secondary education, that is 42%, and post-secondary education, 20%, compared with 44% and 31% respectively of the middle and senior age brackets. Youth also have the smallest proportion of those with no formal education, that is 15% versus 25% and 36% for the older adult groups. Behind these averages that we see over there are a vast differences in national education attainment. In fact, while almost all youth in Mauritius, Gabon, Tunisia, Cameroon, Kenya, Cabo Verde, Botswana, Namibia, and Eswatini have been to school, 6 in 10 Nigerians and almost half of young Burkinabe, 45% of Malians, and 44% of Guineans have no formal education. Another issue that the youth cited, which is unemployment. In fact, despite their educational advantage over their elders, young people are also more likely to be unemployed. On average, across 33 countries, 1/3 of young Africans, 33%, don't have a job, but they are looking for one. A considerably higher unemployment rate than among the middle and senior age categories. And as you can see, that is 21% and 12% respectively. Considering the issue about unemployed youth who are looking for jobs, the unemployment rate here, we are not including citizens who are not looking for jobs, such as students and other categories. They may not have jobs, but they are not looking for jobs. We don't include them here. The unemployment rates are highest among young citizens in all surveyed countries, except Niger, where the unemployment rate is highest among the middle-aged. But rates vary according to country, ranging from fewer than 1 in 5 youth in Mauritius, that is 14%, Ethiopia 16%, Mali 18%, to half or more in Botswana, that is 50%, Eswatini 52%, Liberia 53%, and Lesotho 56%. We were interested in finding out government performance in addressing the needs of the young people. They have cited unemployment, they cited health, they cited education. So let's consider 2 of the 3 top priorities of the youth: unemployment and education. Are government doing what is necessary to address the challenges faced by their youth? Well, only about 1 in 4 Africans, that is 27%, think their government is doing a fairly or very good job of addressing the needs of the youth. Only about 1 in 10 citizens agree in Sudan, that is 9%, Gabon 11%, Guinea 13%. Tanzania and Botswana are the only countries where a majority praise the government's performance on youth issues. Specifically on job creation and education. On the issue that Africans of all ages consider their most important problem, that is unemployment, only 2 out of 10 respondents think their government is performing fairly or very well. In fact, out of the 33 countries, only Tanzania records a slim majority, that is 52%, who approve of the government's efforts at job creation, and no more than 1 in 10 citizens praise the government's performance on the job front in Sierra Leone, that is 10%, Gabon 8%, Zimbabwe 7%, Sudan 6%, and Lesotho 5%. In fact, government performance ratings are considerably better, though hardly electrifying when it comes to addressing educational needs. On average, not quite half, that is around 45% of respondents say their government is doing fairly well or very well on the issue. In fact, Tanzania has 81% approval, Kenya 75%, Sierra Leone, Ghana 74, Sierra Leone 74, Botswana 72, stand out for their strong performance, while Sudan, that is 13%, Gabon 18%, Lesotho, again rank low. Mali is the only country whose government gets a better rating on job creation than education, a sector where you have 89% disapproval, including 73% who indicate or describe the government performance as very bad. In fact, on these measures of government performance, there are no significant differences across the 3 age groups. So let's consider whether Africans support higher taxes to fund youth programs. A solid majority of 59% of Africans say they would be willing to pay higher taxes to support programs to help young people. All age groups are again largely in agreement on this. This is also the majority position in all but 6 countries, exceeding 2/3 support in Liberia, that is 76%, South Africa 70%, Namibia 69%, Tunisia 68%. Ugandans are divided, that is 46% against and 47% for. You have the same in Botswana and in Angola. They are divided on this question, whether to support higher taxes to fund youth programs. Priorities for government investment in youth. If their government could in fact increase its spending to help young people, job creation was cited by 50% of respondents as the top priority for additional investment. Education ranks a distant second, that is 18%, followed by other work-related programs, that is job training, 12%, business loans, 12%. Only about 1 in 20 respondents, that is 7%, identify social services for youth as a top priority. And these priorities are substantially the same across all age groups. We are coming to issues concerning whether the ideas of the youth should factor in political decision-making. Fresh ideas of youth versus wisdom of elders or of the elders. Despite concerns about the unmet needs of the youth, a majority of Africans consider the ideas of young people secondary to the wisdom of the elders. Almost 6 in 10 respondents, that is 58%, agree or strongly agree that in order for their country to do well, we should listen more to the wisdom of our elders, while only 37% instead prioritize listening more to fresh ideas from young people. While young respondents are somewhat more likely than their elders to favor listening to the youth, they still solidly value wisdom over fresh ideas. And you can see 55% in support of wisdom over fresh ideas of the youth. One striking exception needs to be mentioned, that is Tunisia, where young people sparked democratic changes through the 2011 Jasmine Revolution, but continue to struggle for solutions to unemployment, poverty, and other problems. In fact, in Tunisia, 7 in 10 Tunisians, that is 71%, say the country should pay greater attention to the ideas of young people. Majorities in Morocco, that is 67%, South Africa 56%, Lesotho 56%, Botswana 53%, and Mauritius 49% versus 40%, are the only countries where majority of respondents prioritize ideas from the youth over wisdom of the elders. Elsewhere, the elders outscore the youth, including 3/4 preference in Liberia, that is 84%, 80% in Tanzania, 76% in Burkina Faso, and 74% in Mali, and 73% in Uganda, who think that we should listen more to the wisdom of the elders rather than the fresh ideas of the youth. The other interesting discussion we are going to have concerning youth and their participation in the political process. Do African youth claim a voice for themselves? Well, like elsewhere in the world, youth in Africa tend to participate less in most of the civic forms or political participation or political engagement. In fact, even after excluding those who were too young to vote in the last national election, we find that 18 to 35-year-olds are about twice as likely, that is 36%, to have skipped voting compared with middle age 20% and older age 17%, which is an issue that we must note. One interesting exception is Sierra Leone, where post-Civil War reconciliation efforts have emphasized youth civic engagement. And over there, only 1 in 10 young Sierra Leoneans, that is 11%, say they did not vote in the last election. Let's consider the participation of the youth in other change-making activities. First, African youth are also less likely to report attending a community meeting during the previous year, that is 55% for youth versus 66% and 67% for middle-aged and older groups, or joining others to raise issue, 53% for the youth versus 60% for the middle-aged and 61% for the senior age groups. The exception, as expected, is protest. Nearly 1 in 5 youth, 18%, say they participated in protests during the past year, and about 50% higher than the rate among those aged 56 years or older, which marked 13%. In general, youth are also less likely to contact their leaders, although the gaps vary considerably. On the issue about political party affiliation, African youth are somewhat less likely than their elders to identify with a particular political party. On average, 4 in 10 young respondents, that is 41%, say they feel close to a party compared to 48% among older respondents. Youth in different countries show quite different patterns of party identification. Solid majorities say they feel close to a party in Sierra Leone, that is 75%, Uganda 66%, Guinea 61%, and Malawi 61%. At the other extreme, few or fewer than 1 in 5 young people line up behind a party in Morocco, that is 14%, Sudan 15%, Tunisia 15%, Ethiopia 15%. Before I bring my presentation to a halt, I want to emphasize the fact that majority of the population on the continent are youth. And from all the global policy discussions that we have had in the past 2 decades, emphasis is placed on the youth because they are the future of the continent. So it is worth discussing and examining the challenges and the priorities that the youth have in terms of education, in terms of unemployment. But again, how to overcome these challenges through participation in the political process is also important. Thank you very much for listening to this presentation, and then I hand over to Mika.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Gilfred. I think it was really very insightful to get a sense of how age and youth have different opinions about very similar sorts of issues, but also to see the country differences, which countries have differences of opinion compared to others as well. So thank you for sharing that. And then just a reminder to the audience as well, if you'd like to pose any sorts of questions related to Gilfred's presentation, please feel free to do so in the Q&A chat box at the bottom of Zoom. And if you're watching this on YouTube as well, you can post comments on the live stream there as well. So I think to sort of unpack this presentation a little bit more, there was so much that was presented there. I think it would be helpful to discuss amongst the panel some of the key issues that were brought up there, and to really think about why young people feel as though their voices are not included, why they feel slightly left out of decision making, but also more importantly, how can we address some of these issues as well. So Karen, I'm going to go to you first. As someone who's involved in sort of leadership development and instilling values of independence and leadership amongst people, what is your reaction to that presentation? Does it give you a sense of this is what you're experiencing in your work? And if so, what is the sort of ideas that we need to inculcate and the values that we need to instill in order to ensure that, one, young people feel as though they're able to have more of a say in their governance, but also that existing leadership structures are able to listen and appreciate the opinions of young people? So I know that's quite broad, but feel free to talk as freely as you want to about that.
Thank you, Mikhail, and I'm really happy to be part of this conversation. I serve at Emerging Leaders Foundation, and I have seen one of the organizations we collaborate with in supporting young people to find jobs and in public spaces and in government. Emerging Public Leaders, she is also part of this call, and Yawa, I see you, and just happy to be here. Now, I have listened to Gilfred do the presentation and run us through the different things from perceptions by young people, whether people trust their governments to deliver or not, what issues are a priority to young people and to the other age groups. And it's just interesting, but it actually is quite accurate. Many young people across the region do not feel listened to. I have seen statistics from countries like Tunisia, Morocco, and was it Botswana or another country like that, where they feel that young people are heard, but from the majority of the 33 countries polled, many of those young people in those countries do not feel like they are listened to. And the level of participation is also quite low. So could it be that young people choose not to participate because then after all, they don't feel they will be listened to, they don't feel they will be heard? But again, this is now where the whole question about capacity building, training, mentorship, exchange programs and coaching come in. Because sometimes the challenge is not that the young people do not want to participate and engage and make their voices heard. They don't know how.
Yeah.
So it would then be important for organizations now, like what Emerging Public Leaders is doing and what Emerging Leaders Foundation are doing, to build capacities of young people to actually engage in such spaces, in formal spaces, in invited spaces, in their own spaces where they get to invite other people. And it was also really interesting to just see that the category of the age group between 56 and above felt that countries needed to listen more to the voices of the older people than the younger people. And of course, the younger people felt that we needed to listen to the voices of the older more than the younger. So that is quite conflicting to a certain extent. So I think if we listened to ourselves more and more, and then maybe had intergenerational engagements where the older people listen to the younger people, because then they have so much they can learn from young people. And then the younger people get to listen to the older people as well and learn from them. And that intergenerational engagement and learning, I think, would definitely be very helpful. One of the ways to then also just make sure young people get to participate a lot more in terms of job creation, access to jobs, access to political participation and engagement, and access to many other things that the report talked about. I think it would be the essence of voice and the place of voice. It is really important for young people, just as the rest of the generations, to understand that they have a voice, that they can speak up, and that their voices do matter. And a lot of times in our elections, for instance, we say, my vote does not count. The person counting the votes is the one who actually decides who the winner is. But the truth is, young people have power. And like Guilford said, they are the majority. Over 73% of the African population is comprised of young people. So young people have the power. But you can have the power and not know that you have the power. And so that means you can't do nothing. So it is important for them, for the young people, to know they have the power and that they can do something to change their own situation. And I'm happy on the question that was asked about whether individuals and African citizens would be willing to pay a lot more tax to then make sure that issues like, for instance, unemployment are actually tackled. Over 50% of the people said, yes, I would be more than happy to pay more tax so that unemployment is tackled. So you can see there are people across generations who actually care about young people. And so just learning to listen to each other and listening, I think, is going to be very important. When it comes to decision-making spaces, how often do we invite young people at the table and say, this is what we want to do, or this is the situation in this country or in this region, and so what do you think? What do you think needs to happen? And then co-create programs and solutions with them. But a lot of times, even in policy process, what happens, young people are called upon the last minute to then say, validate this report. But it's important that they get involved from the start, ideation process to prototyping, till the end of the whole process. So I can go on and on, Mikhail, but the main thing I'm saying that it's really important for young people to engage. And as young people, we shouldn't wait to be called upon to engage. Just come up and say, this is what needs to happen, and this is how I can get involved. This is my passion. This is my power, and get things done. Don't just sit back. Get involved, get heard, and speak up. Over to you, Mikhail.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Karen. I think that was a really wonderful sort of insight and really complements the findings and public opinion that Guilford shared earlier. Lennon, I'm going to go over to you. You've heard Karen there talk about young people sometimes feeling that they're left out, that they don't have a voice, that their opinions are ignored. But what are some of the practical considerations that we should be thinking about in order to ensure that there is sort of greater youth participation in decision making? but also that leaders themselves are willing to value the opinions of young people as well. So maybe just think about some recent examples. We were talking before the webinar about the election results in Zambia as well. What is that an example of people encouraging youth to participate, and then change comes from that? And what are some of the other considerations that you think we should be focusing on in order to facilitate youth participation in governance? Lennon, I think you're still on mute.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
So thank you so much for inviting me to this very important discussion. We're earlier on discussing the Zambian election and how the youth vote was very important to the outcome of the election. And I think we should use that as a case study of how young people mobilized each other online to actually register for elections. Something that we should encourage young people to do right now, to not only lament online, because if you go in any country, young people are the first ones on the internet to disapprove the way they're being governed or how resources are being spent in their countries. However, when it comes to time to choose leadership, young people are found wanting in that they don't go and register to vote. Even on the day of voting, they don't show up to vote. So I actually want to congratulate young people in Zambia that came out in numbers and exercised their democratic right to actually cast a ballot. We take this for granted, but I think that's one way in which young people can be heard. If you are lamenting about the government that you have and you don't approve of it, from time to time, you get an opportunity to vote. One thing that's important is for young people to vote. But other than that, the young people themselves being on the ticket to actually being involved in government, not only government in terms of political governance, but other spheres of public service are very important. Because when we think about participation, we think of political representation as like the public faces that we see. But other areas of the actually public service, I think, are very important. More than ever now, we need young people that are actually understanding of what young people really need in terms of service delivery to be actually, because if you're speaking to post-retirees, if you like, that are in government, people that are old, that don't associate with the bulk of the population in the country, you're going to speaking to a wall. But if you have faces and people that you can identify with that are young, that are in the public service, I'm sure they will identify with some of the issues that you might have. So I think we need to spend more time encouraging young people to actually move away from just street protests and play an active role in politics and governance. That's the first thing that I want to point out. Then there are these, I work at an institution that encourages good governance. Countries sign up to these instruments for governance, a lot of them. For example, the Youth Charter. There's certain things a country has to do once it signs up to the Youth Charter. When a country goes through reviews and when it reports on some of its progress, young people at times don't participate in these things so that they can actually give information to institutions, multilateral institutions such as the UN, the African Union, as well as a donor community to say this is what's happening on the ground. So we need more time to actually doing capacity building so that young people know what's available to them, so that we are not only online, we are actually on the ground as well, pushing in different angles. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you for that, Lennon. I think we would all agree to a lot of those sentiments as well. And I think the example of young people showing up to be registered to vote, standing in lines, I think that's something that we should all be very proud of, the fact that people are willing to take a stake in their democracy as well. But I maybe also just want to reflect on other ways that people can participate in society and in their democracy as well. So I'd like to maybe check in with Chioma I know that the work that you do involves technology, specifically working with women as well. But I also wondered, to what extent are young people making use of other strategies of engagement? So I'm thinking of, social media, which can be sometimes an irreverent sort of thing, but can also be quite a powerful tool for oversight, for information sharing. So can you maybe just share some other examples of how young people are using new instruments of engagement to air their frustrations about things? And of course, across the continent, we've seen protests that are led by young people. So I think the idea that young people perhaps don't care or are apathetic is perhaps not quite true, but maybe just that they're engaging in different forms of participation. So would you be able to share a little bit about your work and how it relates to young people and governance?
Thank you very much. And a big thank you for the invitation to join this very important conversation. Yes, indeed, young people are engaging in newer ways. We're starting to see, if you go back 2009 from the Arab Spring in Tunisia, and then that wave of protests that just swept through the region, you will recognize that social media is such a powerful tool. Technology is such a powerful tool. I was on another panel earlier this morning, and I was talking about in 2009 in Nigeria, when we organized the Enough is Enough Nigeria protests. We were using Blackberries, and we could only talk, as it were, one person to the other, except for the Blackberry groups that we had at the time. But fast forward to October 2020, when we held the EndSARS protest, we were live streaming from at least 30 different states in Nigeria, beaming conversations to the entire world, from Zambia to South Africa. Fees must fall. So many campaigns and so many advocacy points have been dotted by the evolution of technology. As a matter of fact, TECA produced a position paper just X-raying in Nigeria the evolution of movement over the last 10 years, focusing on the technologies that we've adopted in the last 10 years, but also the leadership of women. Because when we think about young people on the continent today, we have to acknowledge the fact that there has been an increase in leadership by women. There's been an increase in the amplification of the voices of women. And these are things that cannot be discounted. And these are things that we can chalk up to technology, because people are finding their voices. People are speaking up about injustices that they have suffered. People are organizing. If you take the example of sexual and gender-based violence in Nigeria a few years ago, there was a Sex for Grades documentary led by the BBC into literally sex for grades in universities. That wave swept to Ghana. And we've seen a few lecturers, dismissed from their posts. We actually saw a few weeks ago, one of the lecturers was given a public position, and students took it up and they said, no, if this person, was exposed as someone asking, young students to sleep with him for grades, he can't be given this position. So young people are finding their voices. Every single day, they are manipulating technology to solve problems. And I guess, this is, I've had conversations with people about how democracy has not really served Africa, and how people must think about the fact that young people will constantly find new ways to evolve solutions for themselves, because democracy in Africa is not solving the problems that it should solve. And so that wave of technology will continue to find expression in things like Zipline in Rwanda, in zipping across blood and medicines via drones to places on the continent. It will show and find expression in payment systems, right? And I'm talking about payments that transcend government policies in nations that mean that young people can directly earn Forex and take care of their families. It will show in tech in a box in places like Kenya and Uganda, where people, even in far-flung, hinterland type areas, have access to technology. And so where young people are not having access to making policy decisions, they are fashioning solutions for themselves. And I believe this is where government needs to meet young people, not just as recipients of policies, but as co-creators of solutions. Because whether we like it or not, Africa is the youngest continent. A lot of our countries, a lot of the countries on the continent, we have the largest demographic being young people. And who uses the internet? Who are the adopters? Who are the natives? It's young people. So, and I remember saying this to a group, fashioning solutions for sexual and gender-based violence. I said, we cannot have solutions created by people in their 60s for problems that people who are 18 to 24 are experiencing, because you don't even understand what they're saying. You don't know where they're going. You're thinking about calling meetings. You're thinking about hosting awareness campaigns. But these kids are on TikTok. These kids are on Snapchat. These kids are everywhere but where you are going. So the government needs to see young people as co-collaborators, has to see them as co-creators of solutions, not as the enemy, not as people in a standoff fight, which unfortunately seems to happen a lot on the continent. For instance, with Nigeria banning cryptocurrency, banning drones, banning Twitter. And it seems like it's almost like anything the government doesn't understand, they cancel. How about you have a conversation? How about you understand what these young people are facing? There was a question about, would we pay higher taxes, just for unemployment? Unemployment across the continent is rising at an alarming rate. We're not, a lot of our countries are not paying a lot of attention to population control. So we're churning out children on the daily, children who are coming into systems without a proper education, without any options for skills development, and therefore without any options to make a living for themselves or for their families. So these are conversations that must be had. These are conversations that young people are championing. But as a friend of mine likes to say, you cannot entrepreneur your way out of bad governance. You cannot advocate your way out of bad governance. So there must be a meeting point between citizens, between young people, and between government to co-create solutions that work for the majority. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Chioma. I think it's really great to hear your experience about working with young people, but also working with how people use technology in different ways as well. I don't think we should discount the changing ways that people interact with their leaders or with each other as well. I think that's something that we'll have to pay attention to, we'll be forced to over the next few years as well. But I also just want to encourage everyone as well. We've got a couple questions coming in on the Q&A, and thank you very much for those who have submitted so far. We'll deal with those very shortly. I think I'll do one more round of questions and then we'll get to your Q&A. But if you have any questions for what the panel have presented or on Guilford's presentation, please post them in the Q&A section and we'll get to them very shortly. But I just want to do one last round. I think one of the important things that Guilford presented was, how the connection between people's economic circumstances and their perceptions of governance as well. So we know that youth unemployment is a major problem. In South Africa today, for example, we just had updated statistics to show that, South Africa probably has the worst unemployment rate in the world, and young people are the worst affected by it as well. So I think let's just go in the same order that we went before. Karen, I'll start with you. What are some of in your work as well as someone who works on leadership, what are some of the initiatives that you would like to see in order to give young people greater economic opportunities? I think education is something that we all agree on, that we all focus on. But what we're increasingly seeing is that young people are typically the most educated demographic, but also the one that needs the most help in terms of finding work and job opportunities. So what are some of the ideas that we should be looking at in terms of addressing youth unemployment, but also addressing the socioeconomic circumstances which lead young people to be despondent?
Thank you, Mikhail, for your question. I totally agree with the feedback that has come from the polling that was done. Economics play a very important role in people's, and especially young people's, survival, their ability to thrive, their ability to be productively involved in their lives from 18, when they're supposed to get employment or have secure livelihoods, to 35, to beyond 35. That is really important. Sometimes I see politicians prioritizing politics and saying, you know what, politics is what matters. But then the challenge is, if I have no food, if I cannot feed my family, if I do not have access to education, I cannot pay my school fees to go to school and study or build my skill, build my capacity, then there's a problem. Will I be inspired? So the challenge then is, how do we get African population, but especially young people, to then, on the one hand, they don't have jobs. Some of them have graduated. Like in Kenya, we churn out roughly over 500,000 young people every year, but very few of them get jobs from colleges, universities, and technical vocational training institutions. Very few of them get jobs in the formal sector. So some of them are in loans because they took loans to go to school. Some of them maybe didn't even get to college level, dropped out, but they are in need of jobs. And so they have no livelihood. So when it comes to even political participation or their ability to engage effectively and be more informed on things that would have an impact on their lives and their futures, would they even have the time to think through that and want to understand? So that's why I totally agree with what has come out, that economics play a key role. And I also like the fact, which is true, that there's a direct correlation between the ability to thrive and to be productively involved, engaged, and to have secure livelihoods and jobs versus the quality of leadership of those nations. So where you have leaders who are progressive-minded, who are embracing diversity, involving young people, engaging professionals, then that means there will be more jobs and more industry and more, all that. And also that would directly impact on the quality of life of that population. So you can see we actually need to address the question of leadership as well. If we are to tackle unemployment, if we are to tackle corruption and bad governance, if we are to tackle discrimination against young people, against women in participating, in being in the boardrooms and in such spaces, we have to address the question of leadership. So one of the solutions, which I started by talking about emerging public leaders and emerging leaders foundation. So this is one solution that we are working on. So Emerging Public Leaders is an organization in Ghana, Liberia, and now in Kenya that is working to get young people to join public service and get to lead transformation in the public space. And together with Emerging Public Leaders, we're doing that in Kenya right now, collaborating with government to then just get young people to see that they can be involved in the transformation of their own nations. And on our own as Emerging Leaders Foundation, we work with young people 18 to 35, building their capacities to understand that, values count, values matter, and that it is possible to be successful when you stand on integrity. Unfortunately, I think this is so rife all over the continent. The people who seem to thrive and be rich and wealthy and all that are people who get into the political space. And so the question I always ask is this: does it mean that when people get into the political space, they suddenly gain business acumen? The answer is definitely no. It's corruption. They get to enrich themselves in a mass. And with corruption, it means, for instance, resources that are supposed to be invested in creating jobs, in programs that are supposed to empower young people in infrastructure, healthcare, access to clean water, those resources are actually put in people's pockets. And so that means the populations end up lacking in that. So I would say that one biggest way to actually resolve this whole situation is to emphasize on good leadership and good governance. I know that good leadership and good governance might seem like a pie in the sky, but it is practical. It has been done elsewhere. It can be done, and we must do it. And especially as young people in our own spaces, do we hold each other accountable? Do we lead with integrity? Or do we want to wait for that time when we hold senior positions and then suddenly people realize that maybe we were individuals of integrity simply because we didn't have the opportunities to steal? or to enrich ourselves. So integrity counts. So that is the one thing I would say that we need to focus on. But the other bit is to definitely advocate for governments implementing policies aimed at empowering young people. I would say that almost every country in Africa has a national youth policy that is talking about young people and how to support young people. And of course, we all subscribe to the African Youth Charter and the bit about empowering and involving young people. But it's just on paper. For most of our countries, it's just on paper. So we have to be intentional about investing in young people, and especially by implementing the policies that are in place. They are amazing documents, awesome, but they would only be more awesome and make much more sense when we actually are intentional about implementing them. And of course, finally, the civil society space is a great space where a lot of change happens in terms of pushing for greater accountability, pushing for involvement of young people and just diverse populations, the women, the young people. Because then when we leave out a section of the population, then society actually suffers. But when we involve children, when we involve young people and women, society benefits. So those are some of the things I would say we would need to actually be intentional on when it comes to ensuring economic empowerment and just the engagement of young people on the continent. Mikhail?
Great. Thanks so much, Karen. I think, you really encapsulated quite a lot of the various issues there. And I think you speak for a lot of us when you say that there are a lot of ideas out there. It's just that the implementation needs to accompany that. So I think that maybe leads me on quite nicely, Len, and I'll go to you next. You heard Karen there talking about the importance of good governance and leadership. And in your capacity with the peer review mechanism, what are you seeing in terms of what are the most effective strategies to get young people into leadership positions, to facilitate economic development, specifically with the focus on young people? And is it a sort of instance of there being too much policy and not enough implementation? So we heard Karen talking about youth policies there, but are these really being implemented as effectively as they could be? So what do you think are some of the things we should be focusing on when trying to implement these youth policies?
Thank you so much for that question. So before I actually answer that question, I just want to go to one of the findings on youth unemployment. And what I want to say is that the COVID-19 pandemic found most African countries already wanting as far as youth unemployment was concerned. And what has happened now is that more young people have been found out of work. And to some extent, the APRM in some of its governance reports have been sounding an alarm bell that this is an early warning for political instability in African countries, where young people that are frustrated, that cannot make ends meet, will go to the streets and protest. So there must be focused government intervention to deal with unemployment. Some countries have created safety nets. For instance, in South Africa, you have the government giving grants just to, it's almost like a band-aid, so that things don't go left, if you like. But I think there's need for coordinated intervention to deal with the issue of youth unemployment, whether it's assisting in empowering entrepreneurs, SMEs, small businesses, and etc. I think the government needs to come in as well as the private sector. But when it comes to representation, I think in countries where things have worked out well, where I think things have worked out well, is where as part of the constitution, there's quotas that are given, particularly at the political party level, where at a political level, certain quotas are given for, let's say, gender representation, youth representation. So you're guaranteed to have young people on the party ticket to actually be voted into government. But that's just on paper. In most countries, this where these sort of governance standards are placed in, at times they're rigged because of corruption and etc. But at least for a starter, I would highly recommend that young people ask for certain laws that remove them. Some countries were saying you can't be a mayor or a governor if you're not over the age of 35. That discriminates against young people. There's a need to encourage certain quotas to just say, okay, if you're going to have, let's say, 30 mayors in a city, at least half of them should be young people and under the age of 35. So I think that's where we can start. We can start lobbying. Young people need to learn how to lobby. Young people need to learn how to have their voices heard at a local political level, because if you can't fix things on the ground, how are you going to have youth representation in multilateral institutions at a national level when at a local level you can't fix things? I think we really need to go and train young people on the ground at a very local level to get on the party ticket, because most constitution you get voted in through the political party process.
Great, thanks for that, Len. And I think, yeah, the idea of quotas or having accurate representation is a really interesting proposal that I think people should perhaps consider a little bit more. So I'm going to go to, for the last bit on the panel, to Chioma. I wanted to check with you, with your work on looking at technology, but also with a focus on women as well. Is there a sense that you sometimes get that perhaps, there's a whole frontier that could unlock youth potential in terms of employment, in terms of access to education, to being part of a broader society generally that involves technology, that is somehow being inhibited by government or is still stuck in sort of old ideas of how we do things? Is there a way that we can unlock the potential of young people to engage in the economy or in political participation? And is that the space that tech is really going to help Africa as a whole, as the youngest continent? And what more can we do to unlock that potential as well?
All right, thank you very much for that question. I'm going to start answering it by telling a little story. A few weeks ago, about 5 o'clock in the morning, Nigeria time, the president of El Salvador was on Twitter Spaces, and he was talking about the country was going to adopt, cryptocurrencies as official currency, and it was going to be debated and voted for against in their parliament. And so he was on Twitter talking to, some officials from Twitter, but just generally anyone who joined the space. We were over like 2,000-3,000 people in that space. And he also had in that conversation the El Salvador Minister for Finance, and they were talking about these things, and people were questioning, for instance, the integrity of the currency, the plans for stability of the currency, how it was going to be measured, security, and all of those things. And he was responding, right? And after a while, he was called, and it was time for them to vote in parliament. And so he said, guys, I have to leave Twitter Spaces because this vote is going to go on in parliament. And I think one of his aides entered parliament with him and was relating to us, in English, what the votes were saying. And that vote, they won with a majority. It was almost unanimous, the adoption of cryptocurrencies as El Salvador's, or as one of El Salvador's, official currencies. And for me, it was just, my mind was blown, because this was 2021. This was a president engaging not only with his citizens, but with the entire world, really talking about their plans, answering questions. He was very much aware of what the government was trying to do. He was open to criticism. There were questions around security. And at a point he said, look, I don't understand this. I don't understand this question. Let me turn it over to my Minister for Finance. So it was that openness. When I was studying for a master's degree, we were told to constantly contribute to the body of knowledge. So just listening to him, making those contributions, acknowledging where he didn't have enough knowledge, and then seeking help from his Minister of Finance, who was also in the space, was so refreshing. Unfortunately, I had to join that conversation using VPN because Nigeria banned Twitter. And so you have to think about the stark realities or the stark opposites in realities for people on the continent, for people not on the continent. For the Zambian election, yes, we applaud the 70% turnout of people to vote. Even people in prisons voted. But their social media was shut down during the elections. Ethiopia, Uganda, Kenya, Cameroon, Chad, pretty much every African leader is, is seeing the call for accountability and seeing the call for, an inclusive governance system and seeing the call for just, responsibility as an affront on their government. And so they feel they need to shut down these voices, and this should not be so. And we lose out on a lot. We lose out on a lot of, economically, medically, even as far as the ambitions and the aspirations of the people are concerned. A few days ago in Nigeria, the accounts for some of Nigeria's largest fintech companies were frozen, right? So, the Central Bank of Nigeria obtained a judgment from the court and just froze their accounts for 180 days. There is no thought as to how this affects their businesses. There's no thought as to how this affects the people they employ. You're not even considering the fact that if you look at last year, even in the middle of a pandemic, fintech was the highest grossing earner in Nigeria. Hands down, no debate, nothing came close. But out of nowhere, a person just feels the need to suspend their rights by freezing the accounts for 180 days, right? And so for me, I guess like I said earlier, we need to come to a place where government becomes a co-creator with young people. That's where the potential is. How can we solve some of the largest problems we're having? Using technology. How do we, it's almost cliche, but how does Africa actually leapfrog? Right? We're the continent with the youngest people. We're also the continent, struggling with education. How do we employ digital technologies? How do we employ social media? Every day we have children on YouTube, right? Even children who shouldn't be on YouTube, but they have these platforms. How do we gamify education? How do we gamify learning? How do we ensure that we're securing the future, not just for the people who are coming, but for the people who are here? SBM Intelligence, in Nigeria released some data this morning about the numbers of children who are out of school. These numbers should terrify anyone because, like I mentioned earlier, you raise a cache of young people without any skills, without any education. You've created people who are vulnerable, who will become willing tools in the hands of everyone who can just offer them a little bit of money. So coming back to what you said, I think we should have more opportunities for intergenerational conversations that are not confrontational, conversations that say, this is what I'm bringing to the table. I recognize that you have this knowledge. I recognize that you have this access, but here are some real life skills. Here are these opportunities. Here are the numbers. And here's how we can work together until we start to have those conversations, bridging young and old, bridging, tried and tested with experiential or experimental. We won't really get anywhere.
Great. I think that's a really fantastic way to end off the panel discussion. And thank you so much for those insights, Chioma, and to all of you on the panel, to Karen and Lennon as well. So I'm going to move on to the Q&A section. So again, this is an opportunity for you in the audience to pose questions to any of our panelists. We've heard from Karen, from Lennon, and from Chioma as well. But of course, Guilford, who gave the presentation right at the beginning. So if you'd like to ask a question, again, just use the Q&A function in Zoom. But for now, we'll just go to ones that have been posed already. So Guilford, I think I'll go over to you for this one, because most of these do relate to the presentation that you gave. This one is from Bintu, who says, hi, Guilford, what is your thoughts on the fact that in a majority of countries where elders with wisdom were highly valued are less developed countries than where new ideas are valued? So do you see any sort of connection between the countries who value elders' wisdom and their sort of economic development, and countries which value new ideas about young people? So Guilford, would you want to give that a go first? I think you're still on mute. There we go.
Yes, Michael, can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you loud and clear, Guilford.
Great, thanks. So when you consider countries like Mauritius, Botswana, I think these are countries who have rated their government performance in education quite creditably. So I am not too surprised that in some of these countries, the youth are empowered. And when you empower the youth, they believe in themselves. So it is that kind of empowerment that you see in some of those developed countries in terms of human development, in terms of the development of their economies, which give them much confidence to believe in the ideas of the youth. And the youth are also very innovative. So once you give them the opportunity, they explore, they build that confidence and even participate in the political process. So to Bintu, I think I'm not quite surprised that we are seeing what we are seeing.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Guilford. And I think there's just one other question about the presentation, which I think you would be best placed to address. This one is from Pat, who says, thanks for the presentation. First, I'm interested to hear whether the Afrobarometer survey looked at young people's confidence in other institutions in society, and do the panelists have other ideas about this? And then second, I also noticed that in the data, apart from their participation in community meetings, there were not large differences between young people's civic participation and that of other groups. I wonder if the panelists have opinions about what opportunities this creates. So Guilford, were you able to get a sense of young people's confidence in institutions? And I think maybe I should say at this point that the presentation that Guilford gave today is a smaller part of a longer publication that's probably going to be coming out later this month. So if you are interested in the data that was presented today, of course, this will be available on YouTube, but the full publication should also be out in a few weeks. But back to the question, Guilford, did you see any difference in age groups with confidence in institutions? And also, do you think that the way that young people participate is all that different to other age groups as well?
I think with the participation, with their confidence in other institutions, we will have it in our subsequent publications, as you indicated. Okay. The information is there, but coming out with a publication, I think we will expand more on those factors. With the issue about their participation, I think, so from the presentation, apart from protests, where you have more youth, in fact, almost half more than their other age counterparts who participate more in protests, for the other political activities, whether in voting, whether in joining others to raise an issue, whether in attending community meetings, the youth lag behind the rest or the other age brackets. So I think that is just from the presentation. The youth is still lagging behind all the others, except the new forms of participation. But my point here as to whether there are opportunities for the youth, there have been some arguments about new opportunities for the youth to participate. And the argument has been that the youth are not in sync with the conventional or the traditional means of participation, voting, joining parties, joining others to raise an issue, participating in community meetings. So in as much as we want to empower the youth, encourage them, build their confidence in some of these processes to be able to participate, we also have to look at the other available opportunities. Youth are more inclined to go and protest. They are also more inclined to even engage in other activities beyond the scope of participation that we usually look at. And again, the youth are also more active online and they can easily mobilize there to cause a change. So these are other alternative platforms and tools that I think we can also concentrate to ensure that the youth have their say in the political decision-making process of their countries.
Great, thanks for that, Guilford. I think that covers the question quite well. And yeah, I think it'll be very interesting to read the full publication in a few weeks' time as well. So I'm going to combine these two questions and then also open it up for anyone on the panel to address. Libuseng says that I agree that our continent really needs fresh ideas and energy of the youth, which is an unrealized resource at this moment. And then a different question which asks, how do we move from youth engagement just being on paper to there being real accountability and power sharing with the youth? So I think we covered this a little bit in our discussion. Maybe Guilford, I'll go to you first, and then if anyone else on the panel wants to come in, just feel free to do so. But what are some of we know that young people don't attend community meetings or don't participate in the same ways that older counterparts do. So how do we open up these forums to encourage young people to participate, to have their voices heard? Are there any specific ideas that you can think of which would allow us to have a greater, more inclusive debate about these issues?
Well, thank you, Michael. So first of all, if we want to promote inclusive development, if you want to promote inclusivity in political decision-making, I think what we are saying is that there are some tools to assist the young people to participate in these processes. So not just providing formal education, but what's the content of the education that they are having? Is it one that is likely to make them more inclined to participate in the political processes of their countries, to even participate in the community? Elsewhere, community engagement is something that comes easily to people. It comes easily to students. They are trying to do new things. They are trying to involve themselves in their communities. How do we see that here? And how are we going to use education to build some of these things so that the youth will be more inclined to start participating in the political processes? So I think education offers us one. Again, education also builds the confidence of the youth. And if you look at countries like Niger and other countries where you have majority of the people who have never been to school, then it means it's going to be a problem. So education is very key for moving from youth not participating to them participating. Another one thing that I also want to add is granting the youth opportunities to participate in the economy of their countries. When the youth are excluded or they don't have economic opportunities, it will be very hard for them to also come on board and participate in the political processes. I am saying this because we know when it comes to even members of parliament, irrespective of the fact that the youth are majority, there are very few in there. How do we get there? You have to go for elections, you have to elect your members of parliament. And in Ghana, in Benin and Nigeria and other African countries, you need money to prosecute your campaign. If they don't have the economic opportunities, how do they move to participate in the political process and even to ensure that the laws that are there for the youth to be empowered are being implemented? So education is key. We also need to open up the economy and empower the youth to use their innovation to create something good for themselves and also cause a greater political change in the system.
Great, thanks for that, Guilford. I think that education is just so important to all of this as well. But I think I'll just open this up to the rest of the panel as well, and I'll go first to Lennon. I think has just dropped off, but maybe Karen, if you want to come in on this, and I know you mentioned we have all these beautiful policies about how to fix things, but implementation is just so lacking. So we've heard what Guilford had to say about education, but also making sure that institutions are representative. But what are some of the other ideas? How can we channel what Libuseng calls the unrealized resource of youth at the moment to inject fresh ideas into governance?
Thank you, Mikhail. So just to add on to what Guilfred has said on education, education is really important. We have huge categories of young people who are not in school, not in training, not in employment. They dropped out of school a long time ago and might never have the chance to actually go back to school. But these young people would still need and require a secure source of livelihood. So it would definitely be important to have stakeholders and partners come up to specifically target those marginalized groups of young people, because then very few institutions would actually invest much to reach out to them. It would be in the place of government to do that, but governments alone may never do that. So stakeholders, it would be important for them to come together and try and see how to bring on board these young people who are not in school, not in employment, and not in any, not with any kind of education. So that is one. Moving from policy and paper and PR that we see a lot of times to practice would also demand that then as citizens become more aware of our rights, our duties, and our responsibilities and take action. Because nobody will come from elsewhere in the world to my country, Kenya, or to Liberia, or to Tanzania, Uganda, South Africa, and change the system there. We are the people we've been waiting for to come and change that. So if we can have citizens organizing, young people organizing amongst themselves as student leaders, as youth serving organizations, as this or that, it would be very critical to have those groups of people come together to demand for accountability. If we can do monitoring of certain policies that are in place, monitoring in terms of their implementation, to what extent are they being implemented? To what extent are governments investing and putting in resources to then make sure that they are implemented to the latter? Monitor that and then produce reports, like shadow reports. It's sad Lenin has actually dropped off the call, but there's the process he's involved in, the African peer review mechanism, is a great example, for instance, of how ordinary citizens come up and monitor what governments are doing and give shadow reports. So that as governments are giving this report, civil society is also giving this other report to say, oh, by the way, this is the reality. We need to do something about this. So that kind of monitoring, evaluation, accountability, reporting, and feedback mechanism is critical if we are to then actually regain what is happening with young people and with the issues affecting young people. So we just have to rise up and demand for accountability. And demanding for accountability definitely comes with awareness. It comes with information, it comes with skills, and this can be done through social media, like some of us have talked about. We can write articles in the papers, in the dailies, and on various platforms as well. We can do the shadow reports. We can produce videos and short clips that actually speak to young people. In Kenya, there's a report, actually in East Africa, there's a report that was launched by the Aga Khan Foundation that showed that just about 23% of young people would feel that governance and politics actually matters, and the policy issues that it would be important for them to be involved. But the rest of the population of young people, about that is 77%, don't feel like politics and policy and governance actually matters or counts. It doesn't concern them. But how do we move those young people from that kind of a mindset to the mindset and to the space where they understand that what happens in politics affects me? What happens in the governance space affects me in terms of whether I get a job or not, whether I am sustainable in that job or not, whether I can access a good quality education, whether I can access healthcare or not, that it actually affects your life as that young person. So, because then when young people get to understand the cost and opportunity and what that means, they will be involved. So can we have many more youth serving organizations and civil society organizations actually coming up to educate young people, to help them understand that civic awareness is your responsibility as a citizen, And you don't just get to choose when to engage and when not to engage, because then you're actually, in a sense, selling your birthright. And that is such a tragic event. Young people must be involved. They must engage. That would be my contribution to that. Mikhail?
Thank you very much for that, Karen. I think that was a really good idea to sort of emphasize that we all have a responsibility to play our part in ensuring governance is better, in ensuring that we are represented, and that there's a certain duty that we all have to each other to ensure that these values are lived out as well. So we're just entering into the last few minutes. I'd like to wrap this up at 3:30. So if you have any other questions that you want the panel to address or questions about the presentation, please feel free to pose them now. This will be pretty much the last chance. But I think the last question to be addressed, Chioma, I'll go to you, is from Emmanuel here, who says that young people presently in active politics have been generally disappointing in how they address the problems of the youth. It is almost like a continuation of the crony adult elite privilege by other means. So how do we become intentional about the young people we get into political appointments to represent us? So I think that's a really key issue, is that when young people do enter into positions of authority or power, sometimes they lose the sense of why they're there or who they're representing. So what can we do to ensure that doesn't happen? And how can we be more intentional about the youth representation that we want to represent us?
Thank you. So I'll say two things. And the first of them is, I think there's almost an inordinate pressure placed on young people. So you have, Africa is currently led by gerontocrats, right? So like really old people. But you have one young person going to a political office, they make a mistake, or they are so, they kind of channel what they have grown on. And then all of a sudden there's a generalization that says young people. I think that's very unfair, and we must stand against that. In the same way that you have, the absence of women representation in politics, and then you have one woman going to politics or into a political position, she makes a mistake, and then it becomes almost as it were the justification to exclude women. I think we must resist those types of conversations because they are unfair and they are not logical. So that's one side of it. The flip side to it is, because we are currently excluded, young people are excluded from politics, from representation, there is the added responsibility that every one of us who eventually makes it into a political position must, as a matter of necessity, justify that position in such a way that it opens the door for other politicians and for other young politicians. And I say this to every young woman in politics that I currently mentor. I say to them, you will be the reason this door becomes perpetually shut to the next woman, or the reason why it is flung open for more people as a result of the governance and as a result of the leadership that you that shines through you're holding this office. But what can young people do? I think they can form communities of practice where we can hold ourselves to account. My father says that everyone must have that one person that can tell them Kai, which literally translates to somebody who can call you to order in private spaces and say, you are missing the plot, or you are losing focus, or here are some things that you need to focus on. And because young people are more likely to collaborate, right? We have shown that we're more likely to share APIs, we're more likely to co-create solutions together. I think that politically, we must bring our monies together to send to the legislature, to send to the executive, to send to the judiciary, people with character, people with competence, and people with capacity to lead. So proven capacity to lead. And I think that we must hold those people accountable in those spaces. When they go to parliament, we must check, how are they voting? Are they voting for things that concern us? Are they voting for things that make our lives better? I know there is a number of legislators in Nigeria who made careless sentences, and young people came to them on social media and said, you are supposed to be the representative voice of young people. You cannot say these things. These things are inexcusable from older people, but they're reprehensible from young people, because you are supposed to understand our struggles and understand the challenges that we're facing. So I think that young people can create communities and should create communities of practice to hold themselves accountable. I also think that there's a space for mentorship where young people who want to go into politics need to apprentice themselves to older politicians, to not just learn how politics is played, but to be able to sieve out the mistakes they won't make. And this is where, again, I come to to youth groups, I come to university groups, I come to even professional groups, because the truth is we've left politics for politicians. We don't have professionals in politics. We don't have academics in politics. We don't have, technocrats in politics. We just have people who have the loudest voices, who have a bit of money to throw around, and who in some cases, unfortunately, are more than willing to throw away their scruples just to get into and, retain the offices that they hold. So I think that, communities of practice are great. I also think that a lot more of us need to get into politics. And so we're not just registering to vote, we're registering to be voted for. One of the really great things about the Not Young to Run movement in Nigeria was that it widened the pool from which, candidates could be drawn from. And the thing about advocacy is that one piece of advocacy always leads to the next. Right. So we had the Not Young to Run movement, which I'm very proud to have steered communications for. Right after that, we have a group called Elect Her, which said, you know what, we have more young people running, but we don't have enough young women. We also don't have enough young women winning offices or getting into political offices. So we're going to focus on electing her. Right. And I'm sure that after our next elections, we're going to have another movement and another group. And advocacy doesn't end. Right. It's in continuum. And so for me, I guess those would be my 3 points. If you're going to run for office, you need to apprentice yourself. You need to read, right? Politics is not just about the loudest voice. It's not just about the smartest sounding person. It's also about policy. It's about law. It's about citizen engagement. It's about all of those types of things. So we need to educate ourselves so we don't become the things that we've spoken up against. But the communities of practice are great. But also there's a place for advocates. There's a place in the Bible that says, Paul planted, Apollos watered, God gave victory. So if you're a politician, do it well. If you're not a politician, you don't want to be a politician, continue to hold politicians to account. The way I hold a much older politician to account is different from the way I can call a friend of mine who is now holding a political office to say, look, you are making a mistake, you are betraying the trust of the people, and you need to, you need to realign your steps, or you need to turn your steps around. So I guess those are my points. Communities of practice, young people holding themselves accountable, but also the internships and the mentorship systems, and also the intergenerational conversations that ensure that we breed a crop of politicians that does largely better than the ones before them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chioma. I think that's the perfect way to end off what I think has been a really interesting discussion about young people in Africa, but also about their public opinion on things as presented in the Afrobarometer around 8 data. So yeah, just to reiterate what Chioma said, I think the important point here is that advocacy doesn't end, it's a continuum. I think that's a really succinct way of saying that while things are not good at the moment for young people across the continent, we need to be able to realize that we have to keep working at these issues and keep raising these fundamental problems that we encounter as well. But I want to thank everyone who joined us today. Thank you for joining us on Zoom, for your questions, for your comments as well. It's been a really good interactive session. If you want to catch up on the webinar, it is available on YouTube as well, where we were streaming live. I also really want to express my appreciation and thanks to the panel for your time and insights today. I know I've learned a lot, so thank you all very much. Thank you to Karen Wakoli in Nairobi. She is the Executive Director of the Emerging Leaders Foundation in Kenya. Thank you very much to Guilford Boateng Asiama, who is the Research Analyst at the Center for Democratic Development in Ghana, who gave us our presentation today. Thank you also to Lennon Monnier, who joined us earlier. He's from the African Peer Review Mechanism. He's the Youth Coordinator for the AU. And thank you to Chioma Agwegbu, who is the Executive Director at TechHer Nigeria. And apologies also from Riatlekhile Makateng, who is the President of the National University of Lesotho Students Union, who was supposed to join us earlier, but wasn't able to. But thank you all very much for your insights. I think it's been a really great session. If you are interested in the publication, it will be coming out later this month on youth voices from the Afrobarometer data, so keep an eye out for that. And then also the next series in Afrobarometer's webinar from the hashtag Voices Africa will be on the Sustainable Development Goals. And the next webinar is scheduled to focus on Southern Africa and will be conducted on the 31st of August, so next week. So please do register for that. I'm sure that will be a fascinating discussion. So just to end off, thank you very much to the panel for joining me, and thank you for attending. And we look forward to seeing you at the next Afrobarometer hashtag Voices Africa webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Bye, guys.